Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I heard the key turn and knew every small sound in our hallway would feel louder tonight. The front door sighed, then clicked shut. She toed off her shoes with a lazy kick, that undone zipper kind of shuffle that says, "I didn't think about getting home. I just arrived." I didn't stand up from the table. I kept eating the last of my lentils and rice, lukewarm under the kitchen light. The spoon clicked the plate like a metronome for my heartbeat. She leaned against the frame with a half-smile that wasn't friendly. "You know what happened?" she asked sing-song, the way you'd talk to a misbehaving dog to see if it understood. "I had a one-night stand," she said, and let the words drop like coins into a well. "And I'd do it again." A pause opened, wide enough for me to fall through if I let myself. Like a child at a museum, she looked at my face to see the reaction on display. I imagined what she expected. A storm. The table overturned, me pleading, me shouting, me demanding names. Instead, I nodded. The nod felt heavy, but dependable, like setting a full kettle down on the stove. Then I took another bite, and I chewed, and I discovered that if I focused on the texture, I didn't drown. Her eyes narrowed. "That's it," she said. "You're not going to say anything?" I swallowed and reached for water. In the glass, my hand looked like it belonged to someone older, lines I didn't remember earning. "I heard you," I said. "You must be tired. There's extra food in the pot." That answer irritated her. I could see it. The smirk stiffened. She wanted drama, confetti made of broken trust. But I had known a version of this was coming. Not the words, not the boldness, but something slouching toward us over the last months. Too many locked screens turned face down. Too many late texts that needed the bathroom's privacy. Perfume that didn't belong to our apartment. The puzzle had been mostly made. I just refused to finish it. She went to the bedroom with a laugh intended to hurt. The door didn't slam. She wanted me to chase. I didn't. After the dishes were done, I sat with the quiet and thought about who I had been before I met her. How I used to fix clocks in the neighborhood after work. The way I liked to take apart tiny gears and clean them with a soft brush until they ticked honestly. Somewhere in the last years, I had put down all my little screwdrivers. I looked at my hands again and realized they were restless, as if they were remembering. I slept on the couch. Not to provoke. Just because the couch was mine before everything, and that night I needed the helpless loyalty of old cushions that had carried my weight for years. I set my phone on the coffee table. Screen up. No messages came. At 3, a car horn cried outside, long and lonely. I stared at the ceiling and counted the hairline cracks that had been waiting to become something else. A memory surfaced. My father teaching me to sand wood slowly, always with the grain, never across it, patience as a way of living. "Fix things by moving with them," he'd said. "The board doesn't stop being a board because it's splintered." He hadn't meant marriage, but everything useful becomes a metaphor when life needs it. When the first light edged in, I got up. The apartment held that fragile, almost sacred, early hush. The refrigerator hummed like an insect. I brewed coffee, the ritual carefully ordinary, though my heart was not. The kettle hissed, the grind bloomed. I poured into the 2 mugs we'd bought from a market, the ones with simple blue rings that chipped in the same place on both handles. I put hers on the wooden tray with a glass of water, 2 slices of toast, a paper napkin folded into a quiet triangle. A small kindness, not because she deserved it this morning, not because I wanted to be a martyr, but because kindness I gave today would be mine forever. It was also practical. A routine can steady hands when they have heavier work ahead. I set the tray on the counter and opened the drawer where we kept stationery. I took out a pen and the good paper we never used, the thick kind that resists a ballpoint. I wrote a list, not of accusations, but of facts. I dated the page. I kept the lines short: finances, house, joint account, car, the spare key for the downstairs storage, the library card, the streaming passwords, the old photos we still hadn't sorted, the plant on the balcony she always forgot to water. I didn't write her name. I didn't write mine either. I wrote with the carefulness I used to reserve for tight screw threads and tiny springs. Then I opened a fresh page and wrote something else. Not a threat. Not a plea. A map. I outlined the next week as if I were planning a trip we'd take separately. Appointments, a meeting with a counselor if she wanted, times she could come by when I'd be out, so she wouldn't have to see me if she didn't wish to. I listed a friend who had agreed, before I even knew why I called him, to let me crash for a while if I needed distance. I called him again now to confirm. He answered sleepy, but steady. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said. "Okay," he said. "Doors open. Bring your toothbrush and that deck of cards I like." I returned the pen to its place because I needed to believe in small order. I took a slow breath and washed the tray's water glass because I'd smudged it with a fingerprint that looked like an apology. When I was done, I set the tray on the bedside table, the way I always did on gentle Sundays. Then I stood in the doorway and looked at her sleeping shape. It was a familiar landscape. The curve of shoulder under the sheet, the breath that lifted and fell in faint rhythm. Something in me loosened and tightened at the same time. Grief, I realized, is sometimes exactly the same size as love, just turned inside out. I didn't wake her. Instead, I placed 2 folded notes under the mug's handle, angled so she'd have to move the cup to see them. The first was short. "Coffee's ready. Read the second note before you drink." The second note took longer to write, and I had rewritten it twice, tearing the first 2 drafts into patient strips that I tucked in the trash under an onion skin, like hiding away a bad blueprint. The final stood simple. "You made a choice last night. I am making choices too. I won't shout. I won't compete with your story. I will not live in a room where respect is a visitor. Today you will not get what you expect. That is not spite. It is clarity." In the kitchen, I packed a small bag, a week of clothes, toiletries, a paperback I'd never finished, the small tin with my precision screwdrivers, and the photo of my mother as a young woman looking serious but kind. I slid our wedding album back on the shelf with its spine facing inward. I took the spare key from its hook and set it on the counter next to the bowl of lemons we always forgot to use until they hardened into little suns. When the clock on the wall ticked to 7, I texted my manager I'd take a personal day. I left my laptop on the desk. There was nothing in it I needed right now that was more important than leaving well. I stood by the window and watched the city unroll itself. A cyclist with a red backpack, the woman who jogged every morning and waved at every bus, a neighbor walking a stubborn terrier who tried to make friends with each parked car. Life moved. It didn't pause because my house was shaking. I thought about revenge because the word had been gnawing at the edges of my mind from the moment she said I'd do it again. The obvious forms, tit-for-tat confessions, messy scenes, dangled like cheap ornaments. They glittered in an ugly way. But I wanted something that erased her smirk without staining my hands. Not payback. A reset. A lesson written in outcomes rather than insults. I wanted to let consequences do the speaking. If I did it right, I wouldn't have to say much at all, so I worked. I took the envelope from the desk drawer, the one labeled, "Someday," the folder of documents I kept mostly out of habit. I had helped her set up her small design business, registered the name, opened the account, linked the invoicing app. I had always insisted we keep our personal expenses and her business separated, not because I mistrusted her, but because I respected the work. Paperwork is a kind of truth. Over time, she had mixed lines casually. The streaming subscription on the business card here. A boutique purchase claimed as client gifts there. Every month I had reminded her gently. Every month she had promised to correct it. My reminders became smaller as my faith wanted to be bigger. Now, quietly and precisely, I audited 3 months of her statements. Not to punish, to clean the gears. I wrote a summary with bullet points that didn't accuse, only calculated. I moved the inappropriate charges back to the household budget and closed the loopholes like windows in a storm. I changed the password to the business account and sent it to her work email with a friendly note. New password attached. Please review attached expense summary and correct miscategorized items by Friday. Let me know if you want me to book a call with the accountant. Professional, almost cold, not cruel. Real. Then I called the bank about the joint account and arranged to split it into 2 individual accounts with a fair division based on what we had each contributed recently. A process the bank handled with surprising ease because adults do this every day and the world keeps spinning. I didn't empty anything. I didn't trap her. I built walls where fog had been. The sun climbed and with it came a small strength, I wrote the landlord a courteous email inquiring about the process if we chose to change the lease to a single name or to end it at the next renewal, laying out options without announcing a decision. I forwarded it to her so there would be no surprises. By the time the kettle cooled and the coffee had undoubtedly become lukewarm on the tray, I heard the faint rustle of sheets from the bedroom. A sleepy voice floated down the hall. "Babe, is that coffee?" The voice was softer than last night, hopeful in a way that made me think she wanted to step back into our normal morning. A child knocking on a sandcastle asking it to still be a fort after the tide. I picked up my bag and stood in the doorway of the bedroom. She sat up, hair a halo of sleep, eyes still squinting. She saw the tray and smiled like a reflex. Then she saw the 2 notes under the mug and hesitated, hand hovering. Our eyes met in that long half-second where entire roadmaps are chosen. She reached for the first note. Her thumb traced my handwriting the way it used to along my elbow when we watched old movies. She read the line about reading the second note first, frowned with confusion, then slid the second note free and opened it carefully. Her mouth tightened as she read. Her gaze went to my bag, then to my face, then to the window as if the outside might offer instructions. She took a breath to speak, but no sound arrived. A bird chirped from the balcony plant we had neglected, bravely green despite our forgetfulness. I waited, simple as a chair. She finally found words. What is this?" "It's breakfast," I said, and my voice didn't tremble. "And a map." "A map to what?" "To what happens when respect leaves the room," I said. "To what happens next." She stared at the coffee. She looked like someone who had pulled a prank and found it turned into a door she couldn't close. My hands at my sides were steady for the first time in months. "What do you mean next?" she asked. But there was less challenge in it now and more bewilderment, the sound of a person meeting an answer they hadn't imagined. She reached toward the mug, then paused, noticing the little triangle of folded paper I had tucked under the handle, the third note I hadn't planned but wrote anyway at the very end. Her fingers lifted it like a fragile thing. She unfolded it and read silently. I watched understanding collect in her eyes, clear as water poured into a glass, and when she woke up hoping for coffee in bed, she got a letter, and an empty side of the bed. When she looked up, I was standing by the door with my bag slung over my shoulder. For the first time in years, she didn't seem to know what expression to wear. There was no smirk left, only that fragile panic of realizing that something solid has shifted for good. "I'm leaving for a while," I said. My tone wasn't angry. It was calm, almost quiet enough to disappear in the hum of the fridge. "I need space. You should read everything before you say anything." Her lips parted as if she might protest, but then she stopped herself. Maybe she saw that the version of me standing there wasn't the same man who had sat silent the night before. There was a kind of peace that made anger useless. "You're overreacting," she whispered. "It was just—" "Don't," I said gently. "Every word you say right now will make something permanent." She blinked. The clock ticked between us. Finally, she reached for the tray, for the coffee she hadn't earned, and when her fingers brushed the mug, she saw the little card tucked beside it. My mother's photograph. I'd left it there deliberately, face down. When she turned it over, she found a note taped on the back. "Do not become someone who forgets kindness. It's the only inheritance that lasts." I walked out before she could ask what it meant. The day outside smelled like beginning again. I didn't look back at the window. I just kept walking, bag heavy but heart strangely light. I caught the early train to the other side of town and crashed on my friend Daniel's couch. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a spare toothbrush and a blanket. "You look like a man who's done carrying," he said. Over the next few days, the silence from her turned into a series of texts, first defensive, then apologetic, then desperate. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. Please come home." I read them, but I didn't reply. Sometimes absence speaks more clearly than language. Instead, I started to build something I had forgotten. Myself. I spent mornings jogging, afternoons freelancing, evenings fixing old clocks Daniel collected from yard sales. Their ticking filled the apartment, and for the first time I could breathe in rhythm with something honest. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to roar. It could hum. It could exist in progress. One afternoon, I got a call from a mutual friend who ran the design fair. "Hey man," he said. "Just a heads up. Your wife came by asking if her booth application got lost. Her payment bounced." I thanked him and hung up. I knew why. When I'd separated our finances, I'd removed the auto payment link her business relied on. Not maliciously, just responsibly. She'd have to handle her own accounts now. The safety net was gone. The first ripple of consequences had reached her. That evening, she showed up at Daniel's doorstep. I saw her through the peephole, nervous, clutching a folder. When I opened the door, she looked small. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded but didn't step aside. "I messed up," she said. "I thought you'd scream and we'd fight and maybe I'd feel something again, but you didn't. You vanished. That's worse. You're haunting me with silence." Her words trembled. There were tears, the real kind this time, not the ones meant to manipulate. I studied her face, the face I used to wake up beside, the one I once promised forever to. "I'm not trying to haunt you," I said. "I'm trying to heal. That means I can't be the person you test your guilt against." "I'll do anything," she said. "Therapy, apologies, you name it." I believed her in that moment, but belief wasn't enough anymore. "Then start with yourself," I said softly. "I'm not your punishment, and I'm not your forgiveness. I'm just done being your audience." She looked down. "So that's it?" "For now," I said. "Maybe someday we'll both be people who can meet again without ghosts between us. But today, no." She nodded slowly, as if accepting a verdict she had written herself. She handed me the folder. It was full of our old photos. "I can't look at these right now," she murmured. "You keep them." I took it, not because I wanted to, but because someone had to guard the truth of what had once been good. As she walked away, the evening light caught her hair just like it had the day I first met her. Only this time, I didn't feel the pull. I just felt quiet gratitude, for lessons learned through pain, for the steady heartbeat that had found its own rhythm again. Inside, Daniel looked up from the table. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how true it sounded. "For the first time, I think I am." I placed the folder on the shelf beside the ticking clocks. They all kept different times, but they ticked in harmony. Maybe that's what healing is, not forgetting, just learning to live in sync with what broke. And in the stillness I smiled, because the best revenge I could ever have was peace she couldn't disturb. Weeks passed quietly, like the hush that follows a storm. My mornings became simple: coffee, sunlight, and work that asked nothing but focus. I repaired clocks for neighbors, wrote small web projects for clients who paid on time, and every night the apartment filled with the calm rhythm of things that ticked instead of argued. The ache that had followed me like a shadow began to fade, replaced by something sturdier: acceptance. She texted less and less. Her messages changed tone, from pleading to polite, then to short practical ones about bills and mail. I answered those when necessary, nothing more. I had no anger left to feed. I'd realized that silence was not a weapon, but a doorway, one that led out of the ruin we'd built together. One afternoon I got an email from her. No dramatic subject line, no hidden barbs, just, "Thank you." Inside she'd written, "I finally sorted the business account. I paid the penalties, closed the wrong cards, and started fresh. It's been a mess, but I'm learning. You were right about keeping things separate. I didn't see it then, but you were trying to protect what I kept carelessly mixing. Also, I started seeing a therapist. She asked what I regretted most, and it wasn't the one night. It was that I tried to hurt someone who never raised his voice at me. I hope you find someone who deserves the kind of patience I wasted." I read it twice, then closed the laptop. There was no joy, no triumph. Just a quiet sense of balance returning to the world, like a pendulum finding center again. That weekend, Daniel convinced me to join him at a community market. He wanted to sell the refurbished clocks we'd been fixing. Our small table sat under a string of warm bulbs, the air thick with the smell of baked bread and wood polish. People stopped to admire the intricate hands, the tiny details. I hadn't realized how much I missed the satisfaction of creating something that worked because I'd touched it with care. A woman browsing the stalls lingered by our table. She had dark hair tied loosely, eyes curious but kind. She picked up a clock I'd restored from a pile of brass and rust. "It's beautiful," she said. "It feels alive." It was broken, I said. Just needed someone to listen long enough to understand why. She smiled. Most things do. We talked for a while, about time, design, small joys like morning light, and the sound of rain on old windows. When she left, she didn't ask for my number. She just said, "Maybe I'll see you next market." Somehow that felt perfect, an ending that promised nothing, yet everything. That night, I walked back through the quiet streets, the city glowing softly under the streetlights. My phone buzzed once, another message from my ex-wife. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "I came by the apartment today. I left. The key's on the counter. I won't bother you again. You were always too gentle for the chaos I brought. I'm sorry for mistaking your calm for weakness." I typed a reply, but then I deleted it. There was nothing left to say. She didn't need my forgiveness, and I didn't need to hand it out like a receipt. Some stories don't end with reunion. They end with understanding. When I reached home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The clocks around me ticked, steady and sure. For the first time, the sound didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me of time itself, always moving, never waiting, yet never judging. I thought back to that night when she'd come home late, smirking with cruelty she thought was power. I remembered how I'd just nodded, finished my meal, and kept quiet. Back then, silence had felt like surrender. Now, I understood. It had been the start of reclaiming my peace. Revenge had never been about making her hurt. It had been about showing her, through calm certainty, that she could no longer shake the ground beneath me, that I could walk away, rebuild, and live fully without carrying her betrayal like a badge. In the end, she got what she never expected, a man who stopped being her mirror. And I got something rarer than revenge: freedom. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the air roll in. The world outside was full of ordinary sounds, birds, buses, distant laughter, all of it alive. I picked up one of the clocks, adjusted its hands, and smiled at the quiet tick that followed. It was perfect again. Time had forgiven me in its own way, and as the sun broke over the rooftops, I whispered into the stillness, not to her but to myself, "I'm home."